Okay, good morning, everyone. Or good morning again to some of you. Let's see. So Lim is here. Good morning to you. Good morning, Lily. Who else is here? Karen's here. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, Casey again. Hello, Ella. Hello, Mashid. Aliana's here. Good morning. With three G's, four G's. Good morning, Thika. Good morning, Manish. Hello, Sabrina. Who else? Adalbert's here. Good morning, Adalbert. Who else? Who else do we have here? Ying is here. Good morning, Ying. Um, as people continue to check in here, give me 1 second. Sorry, somebody's very noisily washing their truck outside. Okay, so what we'll do today is we're right close to the end of dealing with India, I think. We have made our way through a few thousand years of history, but kind of in a very basic way, right? Man, that's still loud. We've made our way through history, but in a very basic way, right? India is a very large place; it's very complicated, and so we really haven't given the country and the area an appropriate treatment. But we've learned a few things about how civilization begins in India with the Indus River Valley civilization. The fact that it kind of disappears, people leave that area and move to the south and to the east. Indo-Aryans come in a little bit later and develop their own culture. And out of that, we have some important languages appearing, like Sanskrit. We have the Varna social system, kind of an early version of the caste system appearing. We have Brahmanism or Vedic Brahminism, kind of the very foundation of what Hinduism will become. And we have Buddhism coming out of that as well. So we have all of these things kind of appearing out of this part of the world and this period of history. And so what we'll do is we'll just briefly review some of that today, the Buddhism thing that we talked about yesterday. And we will talk a little bit about this empire, this period of empire that we have around 300 BC, so around 2,300 years ago. We'll follow that up tomorrow with a little bit more discussion about Hinduism and something about the roles of men and women in this kind of historic Indian society. And then I think we'll kind of cap it off. I think that'll be it for India. And then either at the end of this week or the very beginning of next week, we'll move on to China. Okay. So that said, let's dive in here. So yesterday, we talked about this guy, right? Whose original name appears to have been Siddhartha Gautama, but he's known to his fans as the Buddha, right? The enlightened or the awakened one. And so we said he was a prince, lived a very kind of sheltered and sort of comfy life, but upon leaving the palace, discovered that actually human life has a lot of suffering in it. And so he wandered the land as kind of an ascetic, trying to determine how to end humanity's suffering, right? And he sat, the Buddha sat beneath a tree, meditated for quite some time, and he came up with this sort of life-changing realization. And he said that all humans desire things that they can't have or that they cannot control. They want things to be different than the way they are. And the attachment to wanting things to be different or the desire for things to be different can actually make you miserable, especially if you cannot change those things or if you cannot acquire the thing that you want. And so he said that desire for those things and the fact that it makes us unhappy and miserable and causes us to suffer, that's what keeps us locked in this sort of endless cycle of death and rebirth. And he said the way out of it is through enlightenment, to rid yourself of any desire for things to be different than they are, right? And so we kind of try to practice that, and that's kind of what meditation does, or one of the things that meditation is supposed to do, is it's supposed to help you be mindful. It's supposed to help connect you to the present moment so that you can experience and be grateful for the way things are right now at this very second. The more that we kind of live in the future and think about things that we want to happen and we're not sure if they'll happen or how do we get them to happen, and the more we live in the past and we think about, you know, things that have gone wrong in the past or mistakes we've made, the further we are outside of that present moment, the more sort of capacity or opportunity for us to suffer. And so I think the Buddha is trying to sort of bring us into the present moment, and meditation helps us do that. And so we gave it a try yesterday, I think, for a few minutes to see how it felt. Did anyone try? No problem, Michael and Carmen. Good morning, and Min. Did anyone try it again yesterday? Did anyone try to meditate a little later in the day? I'm curious. Or did anyone meditate later in the day if you are a meditator? Did you try it? I will say that I did, and I like it. I'm going to try and do more of it. It was a very interesting. Yeah, I was thinking of you, Aliana, that you probably were going to anyway. Chiffon was planning to try again today. Karen's too busy. It only takes 5 minutes. All you need is 5 minutes. That's okay. You don't have to, of course, Cindy. You don't have to try it. But it's something to consider. It's very hard, and it's interesting to consider how busy your mind is and how you think you're in control of your thoughts, but really you're not, right? Somehow they are appearing on their own, and they're kind of, if you think about it, they're kind of pushing you around, right? The things that pop into your head are constantly pushing you to do something or not do something, or feel good or feel bad. And you know, when you meditate, when you sort of focus on breathing and not and just focus on that one thing, you see that those thoughts are not generated by you, right? You're not thinking them. They're just coming from out of nowhere. And so it's very interesting to consider the fact that all day long there's stuff running through your head, and in many cases you're not in control of it, right? And where those thoughts are coming from, who knows? So Lim says, yeah, but it's still hard. Yeah, it's really tricky. It seems like it wouldn't be, right? It seems like it wouldn't be tricky at all, but as it turns out, it's really tough. Again, you know, you don't have to do it, but it was definitely, I think it was an interesting experiment, and maybe some people will find it useful, maybe you won't. But it's something that leads the Buddha to a greater understanding of how to live his life anyway. Really, you shouldn't think about anything, Chiffon. Did you try? I did, Ella. Yeah, all you should do is just focus on your breathing. Pay attention to just listen to the sounds around you. Be aware of the sounds around you. Be aware of the feeling of your body. Try to relax all of your muscles and just, feel the present moment, but don't think about anything. Just focus on your breath. And if you will notice that all kinds of thoughts will start to come into your head, you'll find yourself starting to think about, oh gosh, when I'm done this class, I have to do that assignment for whatever. Just push that thought aside and go back to your breathing, in and out, nice and slow. And then another thing will come into your head, and you'll just kind of, okay, push it away and go back to the breathing. And eventually, I think the idea is that if you get good at it, you can stay in that state. You can stay in this state of sort of paying attention to the present and breathing, and not having other thoughts come into your head. But when you're just starting out, it's very difficult to do. These thoughts will show up and they'll kind of hijack what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to pay attention to your breathing, and they'll hijack that process and get you thinking about something else. And so it'll happen a lot, and you just have to practice pushing those thoughts away and coming back to your breathing. And so, Ella, I did try. It's super, I feel like it really slows things down. It made me feel really calmer, a lot more calm. And it helped me focus my attention as well. Sometimes the problem with all those thoughts coming in is that it's hard to focus on one thing, right? Because your thought process is constantly being moved from here to there to something else. And so having the ability to just sort of push some of those things away allowed me to focus on things that I wanted to focus on. I actually liked it. I think it felt really good. And so, I'm going to try to keep doing it. I think it was, it was interesting. And I think it was, the effect was good, I think. Sorry, it was a bit of a tangent, but that's all right. So we did this, right? We at least tried to do it. We tried to meditate. We tried to be mindful. Maybe it helps us in our daily life. Maybe it's something that we want to do, or maybe it just gives us a little taste of what the Buddha was doing. Okay, so I asked you to read this section of the text yesterday and just to review it today. And so let's talk about this first question here. So what do we know about Chandragupta Maurya? What do we know about this guy? What do we know about Chandragupta Maurya? So Cindy says a couple things. So he begins a new period in India's history. We know in his youth, or we think in his youth, he spent some time in the Northwest where he encountered Alexander the Great. So if you know your world history, you'll know that kind of around 300 BC, Alexander comes out of Macedonia, which is north of Greece, and he will go ahead and conquer Greece, Egypt, the Near East, the Persian Empire, and he'll go all the way into India. He'll go all the way into India before his generals and his army say to Alexander, look, we've had enough. We haven't been home in years. We don't even remember what our wives look like. Let's put an end to this. And so Alexander gets to India, and then his generals kind of say, okay, that's enough. But he creates this very large empire, and it seems that Chandragupta Maurya encounters Alexander as Alexander makes his way to India, trying to create an empire. So he ushers in a new period in India's history. He meets Alexander the Great, which we think. He sets he kind of creates an empire in India that will kind of set the blueprint for empires that come later, right, under his son and his grandson. Yeah, he ushers India into a new period. Good. May have come from a Kshatriya clan or a Vaishya clan of peacock tamers. That sounds like a fun job. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, so that's interesting. We're not really sure what sort of what Varna or what caste he comes from, but could have been one of those two. Yeah, he creates an empire in India, and an empire that makes up the majority of the subcontinent. And so kind of the territory that we think of as India today was one that Chandragupta Maurya kind of conquered and created an empire on top of. And so it's kind of I guess it's a bit of a forerunner to the sort of unified Indian state as it is today, at least geographically speaking. Yeah, okay. I think that's what we know. So he had a conflict with Seleucus. And Seleucus is, again, this is a little I don't know if we'll get to this later or not. Seleucus is one of Alexander's generals. And so Alexander conquers Greece, and he conquers Egypt and the Near East, and he goes all the way to India, and he creates this empire that stretches all the way across. His generals say enough is enough. He stops, and then he dies a short time later. And when he dies, three of his generals kind of take over three parts of his empire. And so his general Ptolemy takes over Egypt and the Near East. Seleucus takes over kind of the Iranian, Afghanistan, almost India area of the empire. And then, oh boy, now I'm going to blank out. Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Antigonus. Antigonus takes over kind of the Greek Macedonian area of the empire. So Antigonus and Ptolemy and Seleucus are generals that take over parts of Alexander's empire. Seleucus takes over the one that's right next door to India, and he concludes a treaty with Chandragupta in 301. And so Chandragupta is able to take a little bit of Alexander's empire back. They have a bit of a battle. They come to an agreement, and they sign a pact with each other. So there's a bit of a battle. Chandragupta basically wins, but they have a peace treaty, and they have kind of a good relationship. And so Chandragupta's Indian empire has very close connections with the Seleucid empire just to the west of it. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, they sign a peace treaty. They get along. They're BFFs. I don't know if they're BFFs. Yeah, but they sign a peace treaty, and they agree to mutual boundaries, right, between the Seleucid Empire, which is to the west of India, and of course Chandragupta's Mauryan Empire in India. Okay, and then we learn about this guy Ashoka. And so Ashoka is the grandson of Chandragupta Maurya, and he will also rule over his grandfather's empire. But we learn he's kind of a different and interesting character, and we'll see some video about him very shortly. We'll see some video about him very shortly. But he decides to renounce violence, which is quite a move for an emperor to make. Historically, empires are heavy users of violence. Empires are usually created through military conquest, and in a lot of cases, the people that are conquered within an empire, they're kept in the empire by a threat of violence. And so if you don't send tribute to the emperor, or if you don't do what you're told, the military will be sent in. And so lots of empires kind of run like that. They run on violence. And so it's very interesting that Ashoka is going to lead this empire, but he's going to do it in a non-violent way. That's a bold step for an emperor. But Cindy says here he was deeply disturbed by the amount of suffering and dislocation that war heaped upon innocent people's lives. Yeah, so wow, you two were thinking the exact same thing. Yeah, so he finishes his last conquest and he looks around and he sees how awful war is, right? People are dead, people are injured, there's blood and sort of body parts everywhere. People are crying because they've lost their fathers and their sons, and it's quite terrible and awful, right? And so Ashoka sees this and decides that he's going to rule his empire based on principles of non-violence. So he commits to ruling the empire based on Dharma, right? Kingly Dharma. And Dharma, if you will remember, or if you read, this is the term for the universal law, okay? So kind of, you could imagine this a few ways, this universal law. You could imagine it in terms of the way the universe works, the way the universe operates. You could imagine it as kind of a sort of universal balance of the way things naturally are. You could imagine it as Mat, which, if you remember from our unit on Egypt, the Egyptians had a very similar idea of kind of the sort of cosmic balance of the universe. And so Dharma is kind of like that as well. If you wanted to use a Star Wars analogy, you might want to think about the Force, right? Because in Star Wars, the Force is kind of this, it's an energy, but it's also a kind of a universal balance in terms of the way that the universe operates. It operates according to the rules and the will of the Force, right? So it's kind of, you can think of Dharma as kind of all of those things, I think. And so he's going to try to rule according to Dharma. And so Cindy here says that it was shaped by his personal practice of Buddhism. Yeah, so we find out that Ashoka was influenced by the Buddha, by Buddhism. And it consisted of laws of ethical behavior and right conduct. So he takes some of the ideas from Buddhism and he makes them into kind of a moral code. But there's a little bit more to that too. Let me see what Thika says here. Ashoka's Dharma is a code of ethical conduct, okay. From his understanding of Buddhist principles, yeah. There might be a little more to that. Do you have maybe a little more? There's something I want to point out. There's something I want to point out here. Let me see. So Aliana says to gain his subject willing, but he sought to inspire, a sense of gratitude by presenting himself in the role of father. That's part of it. So he presents himself as the father, as the head of the household. And so in that relationship, he deserves respect and obedience, but also in that relationship, he's responsible for the care of his children, for the care of his people, right? So instead of him being the king and the ruler and the guy with the sword, he portrays himself as a father, right? He puts himself in relationship to all of the people in his empire. That's an interesting thing. He also says, I'm just looking for the spot in the textbook where they say this. So what I want to add to this is the idea that lots of different people within that Mauryan Empire believe in Dharma. They believe in a universal law, but that law is a little bit different for everyone, but everyone believes in it, right? And so if he says that I'm going to rule according to Dharma, then the Buddhists, they think, oh, okay, I know what Dharma is, and I believe in this universal balance, and I know, how we should behave. And so if the king is going to rule according to Dharma, that's great, right? And then there are the Vedic Brahmins, who we've talked about from earlier. They have a view of Dharma as well. And so they think, okay, the king is going to rule according to this universal principle. And kings have an idea of what Dharma is about as well. And so all these different groups within the empire have an idea of what Dharma is. And so Ashoka says that I'm going to rule according to this principle, and everyone kind of knows what Dharma is, and everyone already believes in it. So that's going to help him to rule, right? It's going to help him to be in charge, because he's saying he's going to rule in a way that everyone already believes in, which is kind of a smart move. So this is part of it too. That's part of his non-violence thing, Aliana, is that he's going to stop using violence against people, but he's also going to stop using violence against animals as well. So he's kind of an interesting character, right? An emperor who's not going to rule by force and violence, but an emperor who's going to try to rule by belief in sort of the universal law, and by putting himself in the position of the father to all of his children in the empire, right? Now, eventually, spoiler alert, eventually that he's going to die, but the empire is going to decline. And so what historians usually mean when empires decline is that they kind of lose their power, they lose their control over sort of the outside areas of the empire, rather than centralized control in one place. Different governors and leaders start to have power, and so things become less centralized, less organized, and a little more chaotic. That's kind of what happens when an empire declines. And so when empires are strong, at least in the historical view, you have one center of power, and everyone is under that center of power, and everything is being controlled in an organized fashion. When empires decline, those central powers kind of lose their power, and things become a little more disorganized and chaotic. So why might this empire have declined? Why might this empire have declined? Tika says, what did she say? Because their politics were weak. Something was weak. Something was weak, Thika, but it wasn't politics. It was something else. Something else was weak. So the death of Ashoka has something to do with it, because the things that come after are the kings, right? There are kings that come after Ashoka, but the textbook suggests that maybe they weren't quite as strong. They weren't quite as good rulers. The problem with Ashoka's approach is that everyone is kind of obeying Ashoka and obeying his laws because they like him, right? Because they see him as a father figure. But when he dies and someone else takes his place and people are like, we don't really like this guy, then people stop following the rules, right? People stop cooperating. And so the empire is only as strong as the people's feelings for the ruler. And so people had a lot of strong feelings apparently for Ashoka. They seem to have liked him. And so everybody kind of cooperated and did what he said. But the people who replaced him maybe weren't as just maybe weren't as good leaders. People didn't like them as much. And so what happened? Well, they kind of stopped listening to him, and other people sort of gained power and things became more decentralized. Okay, here's what we'll do. I have a little more video to show you because it's so interesting. I can't get enough of this. It has to do a little bit with Ashoka. We'll hear some of the things that we've read about just now, but we'll also hear some new things about him. I also want to talk really quickly about Jainism because it will come up in the video. But first, what I would like you to do is take a quick break, stretch your legs, get something to eat or drink, come back here, and then we'll talk about Jainism really quickly, and then we'll talk about the last part of the video that I want to show you that has to do with Ashoka. Okay, so take a quick break, come back, and then we'll deal with that stuff. Okay. Okay. Okay, good people, and we're back. So, um, just wanted to ask you really quickly, how's the sound? Can you hear me okay? Am I too quiet? Am I too loud? Is my voice super annoying? What can you hear me okay? Um, I when we originally started this, I was going to use a microphone so that the sound would be clearer. But the one I bought didn't work on the first day, which I guess I should have bought a more expensive one, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, so I didn't go with a microphone, but then it sounded like the sound was okay. So I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so lots of people are okay. All right. So I don't know. Maybe don't be afraid to turn up the volume if you can't hear me, or if you don't want to hear me anymore, you can turn the volume down. But don't do that. Okay, just wanted to check. Just wanted to make sure because I'm just using my computer's microphone, and you never know how that's going to be. Okay, so right. Here we are in India around 300 BCE, so around 2300 years ago, talking about a few important empire periods, right? And it started off by, oh, well, hey, Maya. What's Maya doing here? Oh, see you become an advanced YouTuber. Thank you, Maya. You're awesome too. I miss you. I hope you're doing okay. I know we haven't talked at all this term, I don't think, but I'm glad you stopped by. You can stay as long as you want. You're always welcome, of course. Yeah, cool, awesome. Okay, where were we? Right, empire in India. So we're around 300 BCE. We have these empires created first by Chandragupta Maurya, kind of unites India under one empire, and then his son and his grandson will kind of rule that empire after him. And so one of those emperors is named Ashoka, and we're going to look at some video about him in just a minute. But before we do, I just want to talk really quickly about Jainism. And so Jainism, the Jains are another kind of ancient religion in India, and we don't have a ton of time to dig deeply into what the Jains are about and what they believe, but I wanted to add a few things. In, just because it will inform the video that we are about to see. Okay, so things that the Jains believe in. They believe in ahimsa, which is non-violence. All of these four things here have I guess Sanskrit names. I just kept ahimsa in there because ahimsa is a philosophy and an approach that Gandhi will use 2,000 years later or so in order to help get the British to leave India. And so ahimsa is a kind of a very ancient philosophy, comes from the Jains, but it will work its way down all the way into the 20th century, and Gandhi will again use it to help free India from British colonial powers. So I just thought I would leave it in there. But the Jains believe in ahimsa and non-violence, in kind of the many-sidedness of the universe. They believe in non-attachment, so not becoming attached to things, and that's a similar approach to the Buddha. And asceticism, which is kind of denying pleasures of the body, I think, if you will. And so Jains who are devout apparently will take 5 main vows toward nonviolence, toward truth, toward truth, toward not stealing, toward sexual continence, which I won't dig into here, and toward non-possessiveness. And so The Jains believe that the universe consists of many realms of existence, and it's a trans-theistic religion. And so this is kind of interesting in that, again, the universe has a natural balance and order to it on its own, and so the gods kind of exist within this order, but they don't have power over it. The way the universe works is the most powerful thing. And yeah, it's kind of interesting how, and this is actually something I was going to point out, Maya. And in Asia 130, do you have Wayne, or do you have Casey for that class, or someone else? Either way, you're going to get a much better explanation of these religions in Asia 130 than I can give you here. But that is one of the things I wanted to point out. You have Casey. Yeah, Casey's cool. One of the things I wanted to point out is that, when we talk about Jainism, when we talk about a little bit about Hinduism, when we talk about Buddhism, there's a lot of DNA that these kind of spiritual approaches and religions share, right? Just like if you go east and you look at Judaism and Christianity and Islam, those religions also have a certain amount of shared DNA, right? They all have one single God who people have to sort of honor and pray to, and so there's kind of a genetic similarity between those. And in India, we see some genetic similarity as well in terms of ideas of this kind of universal law, this universal way that the world works. We see it in terms of this idea of reincarnation or transmigration. We see it in this desire to break free of that cycle, to somehow take your soul and remove it from this cycle of death and rebirth in order to gain something greater. And the other thing that I wanted to point out before we go into the video too is that what I find really interesting about Jainism and particularly Buddhism is that in many world religions, especially at this period in history, especially in ancient religion, when you're looking for answers, when you're looking for the way the world works, people tend to look up there, right? They tend to pray to God, or they tend to create explanations where the gods are in control, the gods are powerful. But Buddha and the Jains are so interesting in that they gain an insight into the way the world works just by kind of thinking about it. So knowledge doesn't come from up there, knowledge doesn't come from the gods, knowledge comes from in here, right? The Buddha figured out the way to sort of end this cycle of transmigration, not because the gods told him the secret. It was because he figured it out on his own. He sat there and he thought and he quieted his mind and he figured things out. And to me, that's so interesting, and it's a wildly different approach than many other religions where knowledge is imagined to come from the gods. It comes from up there. And here we see that with the Buddha, anyway, the gods have no part in that. He figures this thing out on his own, which is very interesting, I think, especially for someone who comes from, my culture comes from that Judeo-Christian tradition where, knowledge comes from up there. So I think this is super, super interesting. But yeah, both Buddhism and Jainism are trans-theistic religions. And so they're religions that are kind of, or spiritual approaches that are beyond the gods. And so instead of the gods kind of fighting and controlling the world is controlled by some sort of universal order, and the gods are just other beings that exist in it, just like humans. Yeah, and so here, the path to liberating your soul, which again is very similar to Buddhism here, is correct view, correct knowledge, correct conduct, correct asceticism, and these will, according to the Jains, will lead you to liberation. And again, we don't need to spend too much time learning all of these and figuring out what they're all about. But I just wanted to point out to you that this is a different religion. I wanted to point out some of the aspects of it. And I wanted to point out the idea that it, again, shares some similarities with some of the things that the Buddha was saying. Okay, so that brings us to the last part of our video, and I think the last video that we'll watch on India. There's I think 4 more parts to this video, but of course we do not have time to spend on all of it, so we will we'll just watch this section. So we've got there's about 23 minutes left on this section of the video, and there's some questions that go along with it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to post that in Microsoft Teams, which I've just done. And so you'll watch from about 37 minutes in all the way to the end. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 questions that I want you to answer. Again, some of them overlap a little bit with what we've already read. Some of them don't. But it's super fascinating what comes out of this period of history, because it's so interesting and it's so revolutionary, and in some ways it's so in line with modern ideas. It's interesting to see it appear here in India over 2,000 years ago. We'll need 23 minutes to watch that, and maybe 25, 35. Okay, what I'm going to get you to do is watch the rest of the video. Don't forget to type your answers. People, type your answers. Watch the rest of the video, and that's what we'll be ready with tomorrow. Okay, so tomorrow we will take up the answers to those questions from the video, and then we'll do a very quick wrap up on Hinduism and kind of how it evolves, and we'll talk a little bit about gender roles, men and women, and then we'll kind of try to tie up the whole subject of India, so we can move on to China maybe on Friday. Okay, so that's what I'll do. I'll leave that with you because it will probably take you most of the rest of the class to finish. And so watch the video, answer the questions, type them out, and then that's the first thing that we will pick up tomorrow morning, looking at Ashoka, nonviolence, and some of the other things that he does in the course of his the rule of his empire. Okay, so I'll let you get to it. I'll sign off. I'm available in Microsoft Teams if you have questions, but other than that, I'll let you finish watching the video and answer the questions, and I'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow, and we'll deal with them. Okay, so go watch it, enjoy it. It's super interesting. Yeah, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so